Everyone, welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum. I'm Jinhua Zhao, Professor of Cities and Transportation at MIT. Today, I'm really delighted to have Bernard Cathelain and Pierre-Emmanuel Becherand join us to talk about the Grand Paris Express. I don't start the conversation by mentioning Haussmann's renovation in the 1850s to the 1870s. That's under Emperor Napoleon III. Baron Haussmann led a sweeping urban renewal project, widening the boulevard, modernizing sewers, introducing green space. It was one of the first state-engineered urban overhaul in the modern history, aimed at improving hygiene, circulation, and social order. And today, the Grand Paris Express is the largest transportation infrastructure project in Europe. It comprises 4 new lines for the Paris Metro, 15, 16, 17, 18, plus extension of the existing line 11 and 14, a total 200 kilometers of new tracks and 68 new stations to be added, serving a projected 3 million passengers a day. It's a one-of-a-generation transformation, aims not only to reshape mobility in the Paris region, but also redefine how cities can be built for climate, equity, and culture at the metropolitan scale. It's really my honor today to host Bernard Cathelain and Pierre-Emmanuel Becherand to share with us the engineering, the governance, and urban imagination of this project. Bernard is a member of the executive board of the Société de Grands Projects, who oversees the design and construction program for this Grand Paris Express transportation project, as well as the industry, purchasing, and environmental strategy functions. Pierre-Emmanuel Becherand is head of design, art, and urban development for the project. For over 10 years, he has been committed to transform this infrastructure into a unique collection of art, architecture, and urban innovation. Before I pass the forum to Bernard and Pierre, I do want to emphasize the norm of this forum, which is for everyone, particularly the audience, to contribute one idea, either in the form of comments or questions. And please, you can type directly into the chat. Without further ado, let me pass the forum to Pierre and Bernard. Pierre, please.
Okay, thanks, Jinhua. Hello to everybody. So I'm going to start, and then Pierre will continue. Let's have at first an overview of what is Grand Paris Express. Do you see the projection? I don't see it right now.
Not yet, Pierre. If you can,
okay.
Please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So to start with an overview of the project, what is the Grand Paris Express? To start with, you must have in mind that Paris is quite a compact and a dense city. You have a comparison with London and New York. The density is less than New York, but it's higher than London, quite heavy anyway. And some data about mobility in Paris region. 70% of journeys are journeys from suburb to suburb. And the average travel time is quite high. The average travel time per day is 1 hour and a half. And 40% of the journeys are made by car. So car is still very important in Paris. Though we have an existing network which is quite developed, but this network is mainly radial. You can see it on the map. When you want to go from one suburb to another, you usually need to cross Paris to have a connection inside Paris. So the transit is saturated inside Paris as you go to the center. And if you want to be more efficient, you need to round out this scheme and to add new routes. So it's a project of Grand Paris Express to build a ring routes. Actually, there are 2 ring routes around the city, avoiding the city itself and connected the suburb between them, the main places of the metropolis between them. So if we look at the map of the project itself, you can see what has been said. 4 new lines. That's the next slide. The 4 new lines around Paris, line 15 around Paris, and then 16, 17, and 18 farther in the suburb. And you have, in addition, the extension on line 14, which is an existing line and the first automatic line in Paris. So this network, it has been said, is, of course, a high-performance network. 68 new stations. The metro is 100% automatic. We are expecting 3 million passengers per day when it will be completed. The network is completely underground, and we can have one train every 2 to 3 minutes, within 1 minute and a half. The speed is quite high. The average speed is between 55 and 65 kilometers per hour. It means that our trains can go up to 110 kilometers per hour. We have, of course, 200 kilometers of new lines. It means that we are almost doubling the existing metro lines, 200 kilometers as well. So also the metro will be 100% accessible for people with reduced mobility. The deliveries of the network will occur between 2024 and 2031. In 2024, line 14 has been extended, and it was really important because line 14 was very necessary for the Olympic Games. It connected Orly Airport on the south, on the north with Pleyel stations and the east station. We are close to the Olympic Village, the Ille de France, so it was necessary, and it's the first extension of line 14, the first operation of the Grand Paris Express with this extension. 6 new stations were opened with this new line 14 totally completed. If we consider the works already done, we have dug more than 100 kilometers of tunnels using 31 TBMs, which is unprecedented in France, of course. And now let's see what are the benefits expected for the Grand Paris Express. At first, you have to have in mind that there are strong social division. On the west side of Paris, it's what you see in green, the majority of the population is made by executives, higher intellectual profession, craftsmen, and so on. On the east part, north and south, on the contrary, the majority is made up by employees, workers, and so on. So these inequalities need to be solved, and it was one of the objectives of Grand Paris Express. First, the first result of the Grand Paris Express will be to facilitate access to job, health, and recreation. 130 universities and schools will be within a 10-minute walk from Future Station. More than 400 have facilities, 656 cultural sites in the suburb. So it changed completely, of course, the capacity to go to this site. We will combat regional inequalities with the projects. 42 stations are located within 800 meters of one of the city's priority neighborhoods. The 30% of social and temporary housing will be located in rail districts. We will develop new activities and jobs, and of course, it will provide services for cities that are currently not accessible or little accessible by public transit. We are overcoming also environmental challenges. With a reduction of CO2 emissions, at least 14 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050 each year, 1/3 by reducing car use and 2/3 by renovating rail districts, because we avoid, we concentrate the new facilities, the new urbanization around the station, and we prevent to have new construction far from the city. So it will also contribute to reduce the CO2 emission in comparison with what would be without Grand Paris Express. You can see on this slide the improvement, the accessibility improvement. On the left top of the slide, you have the situation of one city in the east part of the suburbs of Paris, which is Clichy-Montfermeil. It's a city quite a poor city with a high rate of unemployment. And in orange, you have what is accessible right now in within 45 minutes. It was a situation in 2013, actually, but it doesn't change quite much, so it's quite the same today. With the Grand Paris Express, it will be the raid area accessible in 45 minutes. It means that we triple this accessibility, and if we consider the number of jobs accessible in 45 minutes, the figure is multiplied by almost 7 for the city. So it changed completely what could be done for the inhabitants of the city. It's the same thing for Plateau de Saclay, which is a scientific area with a lot of universities, laboratories, and so on. And on the right side, so the station Moulon Campus, which is in the middle of this Plateau de Saclay, will be it's not really well connected today, and it will be connected to Orly, to Paris, to Versailles with Grand Paris Express. And the same situation also for the airport. We have the situation of Charles de Gaulle Airport on the left bottom of the slide, and Orly Airport on the right bottom. So this is, of course, important. If we look at the governance of this project, the project is born from political consensus. You have here the signing of the agreement between French state and French Paris region, Ille de France region, in 2011, which decided what would be the project, the 200 kilometers of new lines and the 68 stations we explained previously. The key milestone of this project, it was launched, the idea was emerged in 2007 with an inaugural speech by former president on Grand Paris, President Sarkozy, but the real beginning was in 2010 with a law dedicated to Greater Paris and creating the Société du Grand Paris, which is the former name of Société des Grands Projets, a dedicated company in charge of designing and constructing the project. Then the works were launched in 2015. In 2017, the entire project was covered by a declaration of public utility, which allows us to buy the land necessary to do all the works, all the facilities necessary for the project. And in 2023, the Société du Grand Paris was transformed in Société des Grands Projets. It means that today, previously we were dedicated to Grand Paris Express. We had not the possibility to do some project outside the area of Paris. Now with this transformation, it's possible to work on public transport in all the country, in all France. So we started some smaller project, but project indeed in other part of France since that date. Then the dialogue with local authorities, partners, and inhabitants was going on. We had, as I said, a public debate on the overall project from September 2010 through January 2011, and from this debate emerged the project, was decided the project. But after that, we had increased consultation and public inquiries for each line, and this started in July 2012 and went on up to 2015. But after that, we had continuous listening during construction, because we think it's really important to keep contact with people during the works to explain what we are doing. It's very important to have people accepting the disturbance, the inconveniences of the works. So this project is with an ongoing dialogue with each partners. We, as I said, are a dedicated company in charge of design and build, construction of lines, structure, stations, facilities. We buy the rolling stock on behalf of Ille de France Mobility, which is the local authority in charge of transport in Paris. We are also in charge of creating the interconnection with the existing network. 80% of the station of Grand Paris Express are in connection with the existing network. So it means it's not completely a new network, but an extension of the network. The global network will include Grand Paris Express, but it will be indeed something global. We are also in charge of conducting urban development and real estate project in rail district. Of course, we do it in conjunction with stakeholders, but we expect to build almost 1 million square meters of new facilities, new buildings, housing, but also offices and so on. And of course, Société des Grands Projets is in charge of financing the project, to oversee financing of the project. We are more than 1,000 employees, and we have a matrix organization model that combines all business lines on one project platform. So each project manager has all the facilities he needs to complete his job. The financing of the project is quite original and quite efficient. We have a financing model based on air market taxes in Paris region and long-term financing. It means that we have dedicated fiscal resources. Per year, it's now about 800 million euros. It was the figure in since 2023. And with these resources, we can borrow and we can launch funding. So 70% of funding for the Grand Paris Express is already secured with this method. We have a medium to long-term bound with a program which is 100% green. And this allows us to finance the project. The total cost of the project is 36 billion euros, plus the financing of some extension of the existing network. So the cost of the project, which Société du Grand Paris is in charge, is about 42 billion euros. Let's speak about now ecology and innovation. Of course, those two items are very important in our project. The first challenge we have is to deal with 47 tons of excavated material into opportunities. As our network is mainly underground, we have all this excavated material to deal with, and we have the objective to reuse 70% of these materials, mainly with backfilling quarries, for instance. But not only that, we try also to develop new channel to create materials from rubble. So it means that we can create bricks and so on with these materials, and of course it contributes to decrease CO2 emissions, because we have also decided to use only low carbon cement in our construction, and we have experimentation about ultra low carbon cement in order to have during the works less emissions, CO2 emissions possible. We have also experimenting revegetation of some lands. As I said, we backfill quarries, so it's an opportunity to on quarries to revegetated lands and to reintroduce also biodiversity in some part of the project. And then one of the objectives, very important objective, is to reduce energy consumption. So we use the most efficient materials, and we reuse, for instance, the energy generated by the metro when it breaks, in order to lessen the consumption of the metro. So it will be also very efficient on that topics. So now let's speak about design and urban development. And so I give the speech to Pierre-Emmanuel.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you for your presentation. So I will develop the idea now that the Grand Paris Express, it's also an urban project. It's not only a mobility project, but it's also an urban project. It's very different. The context today is very different than the context which was the context of the creation of the Metropolitan in Paris more than 1 century ago. You have to imagine that when the Metropolitan come in Paris, at this time, the line come in a very existing, very dense city, and Haussmann did already the transformation of Paris. So at this time, the Metropolitan was more an object to correct the problem of congestion inside Paris. It wasn't a connection with urban development. It was a tool to answer to a problem, and this problem at this time was the congestion. Now with the Grand Paris Express is different, because the law says that this is an urban project and not only a transportation project. It's why we had the important work about the design, about the public spaces, about also the urban development for each district around the metro and around the new stations. So I think you know this, but in Paris, with the Metropolitan, with the first metro, we had a very generic system of station with always the same entrance. You can see on the screen the Guimard, very famous Guimard entrance of the metro, with a very generic system of station. All stations look the same. For the Grand Paris Express, we decide to have very specific and contextual station. So we decide to have specific architectures and to design specific firms in charge of the architecture of each station. Here on the screen, you can see one of the first stations, Saint-Denis-Pleyel, which is also one of the most important stations of the network, because the station is connecting 4 lines underground, but also the station connects with the existing line of RER-D, located just behind the station. So you can see with this example how each station is specific, how each station is an answer to very specific issues, and also how we work a lot on the question of public spaces around the station. This station was designed by the Japanese architect Kengo Kuma, and you can see how the station is also an answer to the connection of all the public spaces around the station in order to reconnect this portion of the city with all the urban development surrounding. You can see inside the station how important also is how is the quality of the design for the interior spaces. Our challenge is to connect the platforms to the city with a very qualitative architecture design, and also a very efficient way to go from the platform to the city. Another example here with Villejuif. So Villejuif is located in the south of Paris. We just opened this station 4 months ago. It was in January. So this station is located on the line 14 and line 15 of the new network. Here, the architect is Dominique Perrault, the famous French architect who did the BNF, the Grande Bibliothèque in Paris. So you can see it's a very different architecture in comparison with Saint-Denis Pleyel. Here, Dominique Perrault used metal, glass in this station. And I think you can feel how each station with these two examples are specifics, are made for one context, and how each station is not only a project of infrastructure, but is also a project of architecture. And this is very, I think, a very important specificity of the project. We work also at the scale, not only as a scale of the building of each station, but also as a scale of the neighborhood, of the public spaces. And this is an other important dimension of the project. We didn't stop the project at the door of the station. We also developed an important work to connect all the station to all the neighborhoods and to the city. It's why we define guidelines for the public spaces around the station in order to promote comfort for pedestrians. We don't have to forget that the main access to the station will be made by pedestrian, not by car, not by other public transportation uses, but by foot, you know. So it's very important to connect and to make these public spaces comfortable for pedestrians, but also to make space for trees. We had a big issue with the climate change for vegetalization of all the places around the station, and also to improve connections between the different public transport modes, because all the stations are connected with public buses, with public tramways, also with existing metro lines or with train lines. We don't have to forget that 65% of the new stations are already connected to existing public transportation line. So this project is not a project, a creation of a new network. It's really the extension of the existing network. So it will also improve the resilience of the whole network and the connectivity of the whole network at the scale of the metropolis. So I'll give you also a few examples of how we change the public spaces around the station. Here you have La Courneuve station. It's located at the north of Paris. So you can see how we work a lot to change the area with the arrival of the station. You have on the left the situation before, with many roads, many cars in this area of Paris, and we totally change the shape of the public spaces, not only just in front of the station, but in a large perimeters, because we work at the perimeters of 800 meters around the station. So this means that we need to involve in the process all the stakeholders, like local municipalities, like owners of the streets, to define a common project for each station. I think the question of continuity in public spaces is so important. And this question of continuity means that you need to find a good governance for each project. And it's why we decide to create committee with all the stakeholders for each station in order to think about the good public space for each station. Here, it's another example. We are still in the north of Paris, in Sevran. So you can see it's a digital image, but you can see how also here we try to transform each public space into places. Here's the situation before and after. Maybe to conclude, I will add a few words about also the housing development that we try to have on on the majority of the station. We will develop with the project more than 100 buildings surrounding the station or constructed just next to the station. For this, we use the land that we bought in order to construct the metro, but we have still, extra land available in order to construct this real estate development when the station is open. So here you have a few examples of projects above the station. What you have to know is 60% of this project are housing. And we also try to develop a large proportion, more than 25% of public housing, social housing in this project. We have also this is the last example, very integrated project. So here we'll develop all these projects with the same designer, the same architect, and the same builder, contractors to do this. Here it's also principally housing in Les Grésions. So I hope with this presentation you understand how the Grand Paris Express combine scales, the scales of the infrastructure with the scales of the stations, with the scale of the public space, but also with the scale of the city. And I think all these projects, the new project developing above the station and surrounding the station, are a good example of how this project is not only a transportation project, but it's also a project to change the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre and Bernard. I really appreciate that from very beginning, define the project, not only as a mobility project, but also project to solve social equity, climate, culture, and urban design as is ambition there, right? So very rarely people have the privilege to not just witness, but also take a leadership role of a project at this scale and significance. So I'll start with the question of, at a personal level, how do you feel like carry out such a responsibility? Is being exhilarating, humbling, or daunting? What are the challenges? What keep you up at night? No.
Okay. Well, I would say that the project itself is keeping me up because it's very exciting. We are dealing with a project which will transform the city and the life of the inhabitants. So, of course, most of people working in Société des Grands Projets are feeling with this and are quite excited and sometimes proud to be part of such a project, because it's a project you find only in one in each generation, or maybe two generations. So yes, it's quite exciting.
Okay, thanks, Bernard. Pierre, how do you think?
Yeah, I think the real challenge of this project is how to transform an infrastructure into an architecture and into an urban project. I think this is, when I say this, it's look easy, but I promise that it's every day an issue and also transformation of engineering culture, but also of design culture, urban planning culture to achieve this objective. We need to make that people from different cultural background, from different approach, converge in the same way on the same project. And I think this is a best challenge that we have to face every day.
I see. And thank you. Yeah. So the project was conceived more than 10 years ago. Of course, in 2020, we had a COVID, very much shocked the system and it changed the mobility pattern quite a bit, right? Do you think the design, most circumferential design, is actually consistent with the mobility pattern change triggered by COVID, or that's something that you had to adjust? after the code?
No, I think it's still efficient. Well, at first it changed the way people are moving, but not that much. Of course, there are teleworks more than previously, but still people must go to different offices, and the need to go from one part of the city to another is almost the same, maybe wider during the day. It means that you have peak hours, less peak hours because it's leveled during the day and during the different days of the week. But still, the transport remains necessary. Well, what we see on the existing network is that the occupation, the saturation of the network is almost the same as it was previously the COVID.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, actually, we often observe that the trip pattern is much more scattered to the suburban conferential trip. So that actually quite fitting with the design of this Grand Paris Express there. Pierre, maybe another question for you. You had the ambition of make every station a piece of art there, right? But of course, you have to do this under a tight budget, tight timeline. Do you encounter a moment where this artistic ambition, this careful, elegant design may clash with the engineering reality, the need to deliver on time?
So yes, for each station, we choose to have an artist working with the architect in order to develop integrated artworks at the scale of stations. So at the end of the project, we'll have 68 new artworks, monumental artworks, integrated in each station. So this ambition is also connected to this idea to make not only an infrastructure, but to make specific places, specific symbol also for each territories. So it's never easy, to invite artists in an engineering process. It's not the same culture. It's not also the same vision of the time. The time of construction is long. The time of designing an infrastructure is so long. It's maybe 10, 15 years. The time of the art and art creation is shorter. So this is my job and the job of all my team, to find how to deal with this different culture and how to help the artist in order to do the project. I think it's always complicated, but it's always wonderful also when you achieve to meet, people from a different background in order to make a project together.
Right. Wow. Thanks. Yeah. Bernard, the question, this one for you. As you're at the portfolio of your function at the executive board member, one of them is purchasing, right? Procurement is often such a critical function, but often very difficult on this, right? There's the need to procure quickly, efficiently. At the same time, all sort of rules, settings, policies had to go through. When you manage such a gigantic project over multiple decades, are you introducing certain innovation in the procurement process itself, or you think the prior structure works reasonably well?
Well, the law usually doesn't allow us to be that innovative. We have to respect, of course, what are the rules for public market in France. But it's not a real difficulty. The difficulty was it's a huge project, so you need to have a lot of companies working at the same time, a lot of engineering companies working at the same time, and we could fear in the beginning that it would be too much for the capacity of engineering companies at first, and then for companies which are doing the works to do their job. It was not the case. We were quite afraid because I said we need 31 TBM to dig the infrastructure. Previously, there was only 4 TBM working at the same time in France. So the scale was completely different. But the company we have a chance to have in France international companies for civil works, which are working abroad. So it was not that difficult to bring back people from abroad to do that job. And at the end, it was we dealt with that quite efficiently, and the procurement was as we expected. We have no higher cost that what was expected. The concurrence between different companies was quite high for this project because it's quite emblematic. So it was not so difficult.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, one more question is due to Bernard is, after 2031, when the project is built, the Grand Paris Express itself is a legacy, right? But what happens to the organization, the Society Grand Project as an organization? Is the organization also a legacy, or this organization will continue to deliver other projects?
Well, when we started, the Société du Grand Paris, which was the former name, was a company dedicated to Grand Paris Express. So at the end of the project, Société du Grand Paris should not disappear, but was only a company to reimburse loans, and then would disappear when the loans would have been reimbursed. With the transformation in Société des Grands Projets, we have the capacity to do other projects in France, in other part of France, and we started on a very small scale at the time being, but we started some project in other region. So the perspective after the Grand Paris Express will be to work in other part of France and to keep what we have done. I mean, a structure in charge of a very difficult project, of course, complex project with a lot of not only transport, but a lot of objective brought together. So it will be the same, maybe on a smaller scale on each region of France, but we can go on with that.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe last question from me about the climate goal, right? You stated the aim for at least 14 million metric tons CO2 emission reduction by 2050. But of that, you mentioned 1/3 of them is achieved by reducing car use. 2/3 is achieved through renovating real districts, right? Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that part? What leads to the 2/3 reduction that's not because of the car use reduction?
Yes, so the important question. As you understand, Grand Paris Express is not only a transport project, but also a project for transformation of urbanization. So it means that the station we are doing are constructed in area already which are already urban area. But the idea is to densify around the station, so to avoid sprawling, to avoid construction in wider parts, and so to prevent to have new displacement, new transport wider. So by this concentration, we would avoid some transport, and it's also an opportunity to renew some area in some part of the city. The Grand Paris Express, the arrival of Grand Paris Express is an opportunity to change old construction in new construction, more efficient in carbon emission. So it means all of this considered, Grand Paris Express will be the opportunity to reduce by avoiding this new urbanization outside the existing metropolis, to avoid new emission of CO2.
Thank you. Let me add Zhang here for the Q&A from the audience. Zhang, please.
Super fantastic. There was a lot of questions, a lot of interest in this project, and I would say a lot of enthusiasm. Michael Fruman, one of our regular participants, said, "This is the most impressive thing that I have seen in a long time." So chapeau to both of you and your team for carrying this forward. Let's start out with a set of questions around the impact on land use. So very early on, Ellen Partridge asked, are you concerned that the additional suburban lines will lead to more development in the exurbs and suburbs and less density overall? What do you think of that?
Well, I think I almost answered previously. The stations are not in suburban. We are not doing suburban lines. Usually, when the lines, there are some exceptions, but not that much, are inside city with already a density which is not so high as it is inside Paris, but it's not countryside. So we are not in suburb. We are in suburb of Paris, but you have to take into account that Paris, the city of Paris itself, is very small, and the suburbs just around Paris are almost the same thing as Paris itself as far as the density is concerned. So we are constructing lines there in order to allow more densification around the station, more efficiency around the station, and it will avoid sprawling outside the city.
In a similar vein, Philip Lenhard asks, why not develop express lines for routes that are nearly straight lines across Paris instead of a longer path around the city?
Well, we have already straight lines. I think we show it on the map. We have already straight lines, radial lines. These radial lines are already saturated. And by doing radial lines, you bring more people inside the center of Paris. With radial, this lines around the city, we allow the connection between very important part of the metropolis, between the airport and the Plateau de Saclay, for instance, the scientific area, without crossing Paris. So there is a need to go from one suburb to another, to go from one part of the metropolis to another, the more directly possible. And to have round lines allows that without crossing Paris. So it's really efficient.
Fabulous. A set of questions around public sentiment around this mega project. So, I mean, first of all, what Eddie Wilson asked, what has public sentiment been about the project? How would you characterize the reaction from people?
Well, the project has been made with a large dialogue, as I said. In the beginning, people were skeptical. They thought this project is too huge. We won't see it. It's a dream. With the works, the mood changed, and people thought it would come. So they are quite impatient to have this metro arriving. But usually, most of the reaction of people is in favor of a project. When we have difficulties, usually the problem we have with people is when we are obliged to say that we have some delays in the works and that the line would not open at the time expected initially. So this is very unpleasant for people, and we understand that. But this the most negative reaction we have, just reaction against delay, but not against the project itself. Project is really expected. Yeah.
And I think this is very specific to the Grand Paris Express. We know we have a lot of debate and contestation about the notion of large project in Europe today, large infrastructure, large airport, for example. But with the Grand Paris Express, we don't have any opposition, any real opposition. We have specific subject to deal with, but it's really a consensual project for the public and for the people in France.
So building on that, Paula Gomez Reina asked the question, for cities that still lack metro systems or a robust public transportation system, what advice would you give to help build the political and financial momentum for such a massive project? I love this question. She asked, looking back, if you had to start over, what would you do differently in the early stages of planning or public consultation to make that momentum more sustainable or inclusive?
Well, there is one thing I won't change is the debate which occurred to start the project. A huge debate which led to the decision to have these 200 meters, this station. In the beginning, the project was quite different. Less station, the lines were not the same, and the debate was leading to what is the project today. So this is really important to have this consensus. Then what would we do quite differently? Well. No, we know that this project will be a reality. In the beginning, we were not sure it would be a reality. People were thinking we would abandon that after some years of studies. So we decided to start the works as quickly as possible. And the first line on 15 was begun in 2015, so only 5 years. Works started only 5 years after the project was decided. It's very short for such a project. So it means that we started the works without having done all the studies necessary to go up to the end. And for this reason, on line 15, we had some delays. So some disappointment because people don't like delays, and it's quite logical. So if we had to start again, we would have maybe some more time for studies before starting works, in order to have the most efficient way to conduct the project. It was different for other lines, and we see that it's more efficient for other lines.
Interesting. A number of questions around cost and finance. So Jane Chu asked, how big a difference did access to green financial instruments make to the project's financial viability? Do you think plain vanilla could have financed this project without the catalytic green finance?
Well, I think it was quite helpful because the green financing is quite attractive. So when we had launched some financing, each time we ask for fundings, the answer was huge. Sometimes 5 times what we need, and we had very low rates for that loans. So the fact it was green bonds, and we were the first, the most important green bonds emissions were made by Grand Paris Express in 2023. So it means that it is really it makes the project really attractive for a bank and for people doing loans. So yes, this green aspect is really important to enforce the project and the financing of the project.
There's been a lot of discussion, I think, as you know, here in the United States about how incredibly expensive it is to build even the simplest of infrastructure projects. And I'm wondering, Rob Fellows asked, how have costs been controlled? And do you have any insights into how costs compare to the rampant construction inflation we see here in the United States?
Well, it's difficult to make a comparison because it's not the same, maybe the same way to build or to have a project. So I think that the rates are not so expensive indeed. We have control, of course. The cost of a project in the beginning was expected to be less important. It was about by comparison to the 36 billion euros we have for the Grand Paris Express itself. In the beginning, the expectation was about 25 billion euros. We decided to reconsider it in 2018 with the experience of the first works, and we decided to add some provision in order to cover what could occur during the works, which was unexpected. So, and we are monitoring this very cautiously. So this is very efficient to stay in the cost we said we would reach in 2018. And yes, we will keep that cost. It's not so expensive, yes. I think in comparison with other project and maybe project in the United States, I think we have a network of engineering companies, of working companies, which allows of a competition, a strong competition, and maybe we were quite fortunate during the procurement to have this competition, because there was a lot of expectation of works in France. So it was the good period to launch such works.
And just a very specific question from Stephanie Pollack, who on our side over here has administered billions of dollars of spending. She asks, is the cost estimate of 28 billion euros the same as when the project launched in 2015, or has the total cost risen in the past 10 years?
No, yeah, it has risen, as I said. It was 25 billions in up to 2018, and we changed it. We add 10 billions.
10 billion. Okay.
10 billion euros more in 2018 in order to cover what was unexpected.
Okay, just in the last minute, some very interesting questions about the intermodality and the connections.
Yeah.
Pierre, you spoke to some of this with the focus on connecting with public transportation and the pedestrian friendliness of the stations and so forth. Evangelos Simoudis asked the question, did you collaborate with other modality providers like ride-hailing companies, automakers, as you determined how to improve overall mobility and decrease the use of privately owned vehicles?
Pierre-Emmanuel, you want to answer, or I answer, just as you like?
Yeah, if you want, yes, we work a lot with all the stakeholders of the mobility, and especially with Ille de France Mobilité, which is a transport mobility authority for the region. What you have to know is Société des Grands Projets is not in charge of operating tomorrow the network. We are just here to build the network. So it's a very partenarial, approach. We have to work very closely with Ille de France Mobilité, the public authority, but also with all the existing operators like RATP, SNCF, who are the two main operators in France, in order to be sure that this infrastructure is well connected with the existing line. But we also work to reshape some line, for example. For example, we work a lot with Ille de France Mobilité, with the public authority, to reshape the bus lines in order to improve the connection when the Grand Paris Express will be there. So this project, we have also an impact on the existing public transportation network. And I think it's also an important thing. And for example, for the central line inside Paris, the new network will decrease the frequentation around 20-25% of the existing line crossing inside Paris. So it's really a global project for the improvement of the network at the scale of the region.
Yes, this is for the existing network and the connection with the existing network. But we consider also, in addition, that it's what will make the success of Grand Paris Express will be the way people could go easily to the stations. So not only by other transport system, but pedestrian bikes and so on. So we decided on each station to pay a study to pay 100,000 euros, we gave to the public authorities in charge of the studies, so municipalities, cities, and so on, to study what would be the most efficient way to transform the area around the station in order to change the way to access to the station for pedestrian, for bikes, and so on. And with the different authorities in charge of the circulation around the station, we pay 30% of the works around the station in order to facilitate this access of the station, but on an area of 400 meters around the station. So on a wide scale around the station, not only which is just around the station, but on a wider scale, in order to change the mobility and to change also the aspect of the city around the station. And we think it's a part of the success of Grand Paris Express as well.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Sorry, we're up to time. This is the 147th session of the Mobility Forum. Once in a while, people get excited. Most of the excitement comes from a specific technology. Actually, as a project, a program to transform the city, very rare we see this type of example that can get all this audience so excited on this. So thank you, Pierre and Bernard, on this. As someone observed in the US, it's hard not to feel a little bit jealous about the scale and ambition. But also the conversation today is reminder that mega projects, both integrated, public-led, are still possible, right? And more than that, mega project can succeed and can inspire people, serve as a good example for what can be done and imagine in the rest of the world. Everybody, please join me. Thank Pierre and Bernard for the presentation and conversation.